The Christian's Great Armour, William Gurnall, and we're at a new section tonight, how to use the shield of faith to quench enticing temptations. Well, in that section, of course, where he's speaking about the shield of faith, wherewith you shall be able to quench the fiery darts of the wicked. And we've seen a fair amount of material already on this section, but he's now coming to the more pertinent part of it, how to use the shield of faith to quench enticing temptations. He begins with an introductory paragraph where he says, "Let your faith ask God to come and defend you against Satan's fiery darts." And there are three particular acts of faith which will require God to help. Now, you might be saying that's very strong language, require God to help. Well, Gurnall is conscious of that because he adds, we say this with reverence because he binds himself to do so. Now, what are these three particular acts of faith? Well, he gives us, first of all, a section on faith's prayerful act, then faith's expecting act, and finally faith's confidence in God. Now, it would be good if we could get through all three, but we shall see. Faith's prayerful act, first of all, and there's nothing complicated about this. How we use the shield of faith? Well, you open your case to God in prayer. You call in help, says Gurnall, as the commander of a station would, if he was under fire, he would send a message, a secret message to his general to let him know how desperately needy they were. And he quotes James 4, which we just read in verse 2, you have not because you ask not. And then he turns to the Old Testament, although God purposed to deliver Israel out of Egypt, there was no sign of his coming till they came to him, till the cries, the groans of the people rang in his ears. And this gave heaven what Gurnall calls the alarm. He's still thinking in terms of the unit that's under fire, sending message to a general some way away. This gave heaven the alarm, he says. He quotes Exodus 2, that cry came to God. God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant. Now, to prevail in this act of faith, apply the following scriptural principles to your prayer, and there are three very simple ones that he gives us. First of all, show God his promise. Show God his promise. Prayer is nothing but the promise reversed, or as God's word formed into request and sent back by faith to himself again. Show God his own hands in such promises as these. Romans 6:14, sin shall not have dominion over you. Micah 7:19, he will subdue our iniquities. A good man is as good as his word, he says. And if that's true of man, it is all the more of God. Show God his promise. Secondly, plead with God as his child when you pray against sin. God doesn't receive glory when one of his children is a slave to sin. And so the psalmist says, order my footsteps in thy word. Let my footsteps in thy word are right, still ordered be. Let not iniquity obtain dominion over me. And then thirdly, engage God from his son's bloody death to free you from sin and lust. God after all died, Christ after all died, I should say, to redeem us from all iniquity and to purify unto himself a peculiar people, Titus 2:14. Well, the full benefit of the price of his blood and the purchase of his death, surely that will be given. In a word, what is Christ praying for in heaven? Well, the same thing that his mouth prayed for on earth. You remember, he's thinking here of John 17, perhaps, that his Father would sanctify and keep his people from the evil of the world. You come in a good time when you ask God for something which Christ has already asked him to give you. You come in a good time when you ask God for something which Christ has already asked him to give you. So that's the first section on how to use the shield of faith, faith's prayerful ask, showing God his promises, pleading as a child, and engaging Christ's death and all that he purchased with it. But then we have, secondly, faith's expecting act, and this is the longest of the three sections. When you have been with God, expect good from him. He quotes Psalm 5, where the psalmist speaks of directing his prayer and then looking up expectantly. And we are to be expectant. If you don't believe, well, why would you pray? And if you believe, why do you not expect? He puts it that simply. Otherwise, it is taking his name in vain. It's as somebody, says Gurnall, were knocking at the door, but they turn away before you can open it and speak with him. Not so with God. And he has another illustration. For a man to break into your house after you've closed the door would be presumptuous. But for him to come out of a storm into your house when you invite him in, well, that's not presumption. That's graciousness. And in the same way, if God will not open the door of his promise and prove himself a sanctuary to the poor sinner who escapes from the rages of sin, I know of no one this side of heaven who can expect welcome if God himself will not do it. God has promised to be a king to his people, and it's quite right for his subjects to come to the prince's shadow and expect his protection to be over them. Isaiah 33, God himself says that he will be to us a place of broad rivers and streams, wherein shall go no alley with oars, neither shall gallant ships pass thereby. And besides, says Gurnall, you also have others who have gone before you. You have the saints. When they were in combat with corruption, they act on faith and they look to God to ruin those who would seek to ruin and overrun them. And at the very time their enemies seem to prevail, their faith actually sees God stepping in to destroy them. In Psalm 65, David spoke not only of his own faith, but also of that for all believers. As for our transgressions, he says, thou shalt purge them away. And you mark the ground of his confidence. It's the previous verse. Blessed is the man whom thou dost choose, and makest approach to thee, that he within thy courts, O Lord, may still a dweller be. It's as if he said, surely the Father will not let those so close to him waste away under the power of sin without his intervention. And this is Christ's own argument, in fact, against Satan on behalf of his people. Zechariah 3:2, the Lord rebuke thee, O Satan, even the Lord that hath chosen Jerusalem. So we have this expecting act of faith, and it must encourage you, says Gurnall, to see what God has already empowered you to do. If you're a believer, is it not the truth that sin does not have the same power in your heart that it did before you knew Christ, before you knew his word and his ways? You're not what you want to be, but you're not what you were either. Your relationship to sin has changed. There was a time when sin played king in your heart. You went to sin as a ship to sea. Before the wind and the tide, you spread your affections to receive the gale of temptation. But that was then. Now the tide has turned, and you find a secret strength to wrestle with temptation. Now, we're going to say a little more about this tomorrow morning in the Gaelic as it happens. Now the tide has turned, and you find a secret strength to wrestle with temptations. And because it is God who helps, Satan cannot loose all his will on you. But he wants your faith will prove into confidence of a deliverance. God, after all, has he not broken the heart that was like flint and brought the believer home when they were walking against God? He's taken them out of Egypt. But just as Israel came into the land of promise, there were these giants in iron chariots which stood between them and Canaan. Well, can he not master those giants, says Gurnall. He helped me in one temptation. What will I do the next time? Oh, don't grieve God with such heartbreaking questions. You have the former rain. Why would you question the latter? The grace which God gave is a sure pledge that more is on the way. How do you use the shield of faith? Well, we have faith's prayerful act, we have faith's expecting act, and finally, we have faith's confidence in God. We read there in 2 Chronicles 20 about Jehoshaphat. He prayed, he anchored his faith on the word of promise that he had received, and he marched out. And he marched out victorious. Christian, says Gurnall, you do what Jehoshaphat did. Hasten as he hastened. And I'll give you the same counsel, he says, which David gave his own son Solomon. Arise, therefore, and be doing, and the Lord be with thee. 1 Chronicles 22:16. The same faith which caused you to work against your sins as God's enemies will undoubtedly move him to work for you against them. Then he speaks of the lepers in the gospel. They weren't cured, not as they sat, but as they walked. They met their healing in an act of obedience to Christ's command. The promise says, sin shall not have dominion over you, Romans 6:14. So you go ahead, you make a valiant attempt against sin, and as you do your duty, you will find God performing according to promise. The reason so many Christians complain about the power of corruption lies in one of two roots. Either they try to overcome sin themselves without acting on the promises, or they're only pretending to believe. We can use faith as an eye, but not as a hand. We are to look for victory, but we aren't to look for it to drop from heaven on our heads, as Gurnall says. We are to prayerfully fight to get it. The man who believes that God will cause a thing to happen also believes that he will prosper the means which he appoints to bring it about. Well, one final word from Gurnall. Therefore, Christian, don't sit still and say your sin will fall. Be realistic, put on the armour, and remember the God who has promised you the victory. He means you to use your hand in the battle. Get thee up, said God to Joshua, wherefore liest thou thus upon thy face? Now God received his prayer, but before the Amorites could be defeated, there was something else for Joshua to do besides praying and weeping. And God has something else for you to do as well. With your faith, search your heart to see if some sin is hiding there that will make you run before the face of new temptations. So, how to use the shield of faith? Faith's prayerful act, faith's expecting act, and faith's confidence in God. And that will bring us then to a new section, faith's darts, the fiery darts rather, of fearful temptations, and faith's power to deal with them. But we shall take that up when we next meet.